The second great development was the re-establishment of religion. This too had been voiced in the celebrated lecture. No one could mistake the reverent tone in which the peroration had concluded, and it awakened a responsive echo in the heart of each. Those who had long worshipped silently now began to talk. They described the strange feeling of peace that came over them when they handled the book of the machine, the pleasure that it was to repeat certain numerals out of it, however little meaning those numerals conveyed to the outward ear, the ecstasy of touching a button, however unimportant, or of ringing an electric bell, however superfluously. "The machine," they exclaimed, "feeds us, and clothes us, and houses us. Through it we speak to one another, through it we see one another, in it we have our being. The machine is the friend of ideas and the enemy of superstition. The machine is omnipotent, eternal. Blessed is the machine." And before long this allocution was printed on the first page of the book, and in subsequent editions the ritual swelled into a complicated system of praise and prayer. The word religion was sedulously avoided, and in theory the machine was still the creation and the implement of man. But in practice all, save a few retrogrades, worshipped it as divine. Nor was it worshipped in unity. One believer would be chiefly impressed by the blue optic plates through which he saw other believers, another by the mending apparatus, which sinful Kuno had compared to worms, another by the lifts, another by the book, and each would pray to this or to that, and ask it to intercede for him with the machine as a whole. No one confessed the machine was out of hand. Year by year it was served with increased efficiency and decreased intelligence. The better a man knew his own duties upon it, the less he understood the duties of his neighbour, and in all the world there was not one who understood the monster as a whole. Those master brains had perished. They had left full directions, it is true, and their successors had each of them mastered a portion of those directions. But humanity, in its desire for comfort, had overreached itself. It had exploited the riches of nature too far. Quietly and complacently, it was sinking into decadence, and progress had come to mean the progress of the machine.
He walked out in the grey light and stood, and he saw for a brief moment the absolute truth of the world. The cold, relentless circling of the intestate earth. Darkness implacable. The blind dogs of the sun in their running. The crushing black vacuum of the universe. And somewhere 200 animals trembling like ground foxes in their cover. Borrowed time and borrowed world and borrowed eyes with which to sorrow it.
And lo, for the earth was empty of form, and void, and darkness was all over the face of the deep, and we said, "Look at that fucker dance."
Welcome to Heat Death of the Universe, being broadcast from well beneath the Earth's surface, in a chamber filled with scrumptious artificial air, the sounds of classical music, and the steady hum of the all-loving machine. Oh, machine! It is 10:35 a.m. on this Friday, October 22nd, 2021, year of our Lord, push button euthanasia, Lord and sponsor. And today we have another edition of our patented Heat Death of the Universe book club. And we're going to discuss I guess technically it's not a book. Some might argue it's a novella, but mostly I think people just call it a short story. Maybe you call it a long short story. It's a story, folks. It's a story called The Machine Stops. It's a very interesting historical curiosity that it gets some play in the culture at large, but not nearly as much as I think it deserves. But I guess we'll get into more of why that is as we talk about what the hell it is. So it's written by a very famous British author, E.M. Forster. I think for a long time I always wanted to say his name was Forster, but that's not right. It's Forster. This is the only thing by him I've ever read. Have you read any of his novels?
No, I haven't.
So I guess just a quick condensed bio on this guy. He was born January 1st, 1879, lived a long life until June 7th, 1970. And he wrote many extremely well-known, highly praised novels that have I think all been turned into award-winning or prestige movies since then, probably several times over. So A Room with a View, Howard's End, A Passage to India.
Oh, he did A Room with a View?
Yeah.
I guess I did know that.
I've never seen any of the movies. I've never read any of the books. But what I always think of was going to the video store as a kid and seeing the poster for Howard's End with Anthony Hopkins, and always just thinking, with my dumb child brain, of course, but whatever, God, that looks fucking boring. Just based on the poster, old stuffy English drama or something, And I feel that childish thought has probably stuck with me to some degree, maybe unconsciously since then. But after reading this short story, I want to check out some of these novels, because from what I can tell, they kind of deal with not exactly the same issues, but they're not proto-sci-fi at all. But I guess they deal with class differences and kind of broader sort of social issues, even if they're through I guess the lens of maybe I don't know, a focused drama or something. But anyway, yeah, highly celebrated author. I don't know, I guess I don't know how this is relevant to the book, but he was sort of I guess you couldn't call him openly gay, but he was.
1 second, Josh.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's fine now. Was he? Sorry for that interruption. I got shocked by something.
Jesus.
My phone started making a lot of noise at me. I forgot I didn't have it on silent.
I thought you meant an electrical shock.
No. I just my phone. I got scared by my phone. Okay?
Okay.
Podcasters, I'm not used to things making noise like phones. Forgive me here.
Well, this is
I'm an idiot.
This is fitting for the episode. The terror of technology.
I've spent most of my life loving technology, and these days I do feel like I'm developing a bit of a, as you'd call it, terror to technology.
So I was just about to delve into this guy's sexuality for a second.
I don't have a terror of sexuality.
I don't know. I've got clips I could summon from the podcast that might say otherwise, but no, I hear you. Well, anyway, just to say that he wasn't publicly open, but I guess he was open with his friends and stuff. And after his death, they published his only sort of explicitly, I mean, just by explicit, I mean clearly gay novel, I guess you could call it. So it seems like a interesting guy from the little bits that I read here and there. And so the headline on this story is basically, it was written in, or at least published in 1909. It's a long time ago, and it truly like predicted, or however you want to put it, it describes the internet basically, and not just the internet, but like video conferencing, kind of instant messaging in a way. Maybe, yeah, like I mean, I guess you would call it like that, because there's voice chatting when there's video, but there's also video chatting. And this is in a time when like screens period, like didn't exist. So it's like it's kind of the main thing this story is known for, is just like how it's really mind-boggling how prescient it was in predicting these kind of technologies.
Sure.
But I would go further and say that like not only did it predict like those kind of technologies, but it predicts like the effects that they would have on people and society in a way that's disturbingly accurate.
I was going to say, I know that other people were also predicting these type of technologies at the same time, but what this book really does is I think he was the first to really start predicting the addictive natures of these technologies, of how people would just come to rely on them to a point to where they lost all their sense of self.
Who else was like predicting this kind of stuff? I'm just curious, like, because I was looking for other authors and stuff that maybe were coming up with this stuff before him, and I felt like I couldn't really find anything. But are you talking about like scientists or like fiction writers or what?
I mean, fiction writers and scientists maybe. I was thinking people like Asimov, who has like, instant messaging like things in some of his stories.
Yeah, but that's way after this.
Asimov is? Oh, sorry, I'm bad with time.
He was heavily influenced by this book, actually.
Never mind then. I'm just dumb.
1909, man. Asimov is like post-war?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
I was thinking this book came out a bit later than 1909. I don't know why you even just said it.
No, that's the shocking thing, man. This is before like telephones. This is before like the wide use of even like automobiles, like machinery itself. Like, forget about electronics. Like, machines were even like pretty rudimentary at this point. Electricity is like barely even like really mentioned. Like, most of this is like all just kind of like cogs and like just like crude machine, but like it's wide reaching and like I guess maybe intricate, but it's like it's not run like on computers or anything, because like I mean that concept just like didn't exist at the time. But he still comes up with like this sort of machine based like analog version of like what we could see as like digital technology.
I guess because I had to do a quick matrix search. Quick matrix. What is wrong with me today? Matrix. I don't even have the matrix on the mind. I did like just the machine stop is basically the first, but it does look like that Mark Twain had an article in the London Times in 1904 that was also predicting something like he was kind of doing like a short story about a U.S. Army officer who is falsely convicted for murdering someone who has invented the telectroscope, which was like a device that allows users to see and talk to people all over the planet, which was like a Mark Twain, like, I guess, newspaper short story that people compare to the machine stops, and now I kind of want to read it.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know about that. But then just to like, I guess to give Mr. Forster props, like just just reiterate what you just said. Like, the difference might be that Forster really gets into the psychological and social effects that these kind of technologies would have. And I guess what separates just the technology from the greater story in this story is that the entire world, like all human beings, live in underground chambers that are individualized, and the machine, capital M, it provides like all sort of physical and spiritual necessities, or so it seems.
Oh, I didn't even picture it as like underground. I guess maybe the book said that. I was just picturing like a dead earth and maybe just like some warehouses.
No, it's
everyone was shoved into uncomfortably.
Literally all living underground. That's the whole point. Is the authority figures at least say that the air is poisonous, and that's why you're not really allowed to go to the Earth's surface within the story.
Okay.
Which actually, I mean, we'll get into this a little later, down like along with the plot, but there are exceptions to where you can go up to the surface. But just to stay with the wider view for a second, like kind of thinking about like the history of science fiction. Oh, and that's the other thing is that Forster wrote this, like, I don't know, this just amazingly prescient short story. And it's considered, I think at the time he wrote it, the term science fiction didn't even exist. It was called, I think they were called scientific romances is what I read. Yeah. So like H.G. Wells.
Yeah, I think so too.
H.G. Wells and Jules Verne's, like those books were called, scientific romances. And, this book, Forster himself said that it was a direct response to H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, because he viewed The Time Machine as being like too utopian and not like taking into account, like, I guess basically like the negative consequences that could come from just kind of runaway technological development. And so he was like, and he wasn't being like, oh, fuck you, Wells. Like, I think he admired H.G. Wells, but like he was just kind of saying like, well, why don't we think about the flip side to this? Is basically the idea from what I gather here. Even though in one of the articles I was reading about all of this, like it kind of points out that, H.G. Wells also points out some of the sort of horrific things that could happen in these distant sort of sci-fi futures, but he doesn't really attribute it directly to the technology, I don't think so much. But anyway, just a little more sort of background information there. I also I was looking for like what's considered the earliest sci-fi, and I had looked at this before, and I guess it
was like utopia sci-fi, right? Or am I wrong about that? I thought like some of the earliest was like these like grand like utopia science fictions, but that really fell to the wayside once people came up with more dystopian ideals.
Well, yeah, like I think like you could say that about H.G. Wells, and I guess maybe Jules Verne. I don't know. I'm trying to remember the Jules Verne things I'm thinking of are like, I don't know if they're utopian or not, but no, I'm talking like way, way in the past. Like, so I guess there's this book that, Kepler, Johannes Kepler, the astronomer, wrote. It's called The Dream. And I thought that I remember reading before that there was like space travel in it, so that's why it's considered like the first sort of proto-science fiction. But I looked at the summary of the story yesterday, and it's kind of a stretch to call that science fiction, because there's no like machinery or anything even like akin to machinery. It's like literally like these like fucking demon spirits or something that like carry these people up to the moon. But in any case, it is people like doing like extraterrestrial travel, I guess. But then if you like, I don't know, if you take a quick glance at the science fiction Wikipedia page, it attributes like like if you want to really make a stretch, like so the earliest science fiction is like back in like ancient Greece and Rome. Like there are stories about like, traveling to other worlds and stuff. But I don't know. I think that's all a little bit of a stretch. But so even though, say, like H.G. Wells and stuff was before this story, I still think this story was the first, like, as far as I know. I'm sure there's probably some exceptions. Someone could probably prove me wrong. Please write in if you know better. But this to me seems like it really was the first, like, dystopian novel, like, as we understand, like, the genre of, like, dystopian stories. I guess just maybe in the modern sense, where, like, technology and, like, authoritarianism, like, turn the world upside down, like, almost quite literally, like, people are literally living under the earth. I would just say, yeah, this book is, like, hugely influential, like, even on people who've never heard of it. I don't know this for sure, but to me, like, so, like, what are the big, like, dystopian novels? Brave New World, 1984, maybe Fahrenheit 451 as well, which I've still actually never read that one, but I recently heard
Giver.
I never read that one either, actually. I guess I'm just thinking of, like, the big books that, like, people reference all the time when they're talking about, like, what predicted our society that we live in now, and all you ever hear is Brave New World in 1984. And
I think Brave New World is closer, but some people think 1984 is closer.
Yeah, that's like there's like that's really like a kind of like a common discussion is, like, which one is more accurate. And then the thing I've always heard that I find most convincing is that it's like we're really living in, like, a combination of both of them. That sort of makes a lot of sense to me. I would definitely side more towards Brave New World as well. But I think there's elements of 1984 that we definitely are experiencing in the last whatever 20, 30-ish years. And but I guess I just want to add to that. To me, this story should be part of that conversation, because this really completes, like, this sort of, like, trifecta of, like, because neither of those books really talk about I guess Brave New World does. See, the other thing is I haven't read either of those books for, like, I was thinking about it earlier today, like, at least 2.5 decades. My God, that makes me feel old. But, like, I read those books when I was, like, a young teenager, and I don't think I ever went back to them. Even though I liked them, I especially liked Brave New World. I was always more of a Huxley man.
Man, I was just gonna say that this is a newer book. Well, not newer. Newer is relative here, but I often think that Neuromancer and some of the stuff that Gibson did was much better at predicting our current future. But that's, like, I guess 80s, so that's why I said newer.
Yeah, but then, I mean, I actually still haven't read that, but I mean, I know.
Oh, it's great. I think you'd really like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been on my to-do list for years.
Though I always compare it to Snow Crash, which I think is just as good, by Stevenson, who is one of my all-time favorite authors. I guess Gibson is too. Highly recommend both of them.
But
sorry.
No, I'm sure they're good novels. I mean, I like a lot of, like, more modern books of this sort. But
yeah, The Machine Stops what kind of made me think of them, and often I, like, crazy thing to me now is that both of those books are nearly 40 years old, and I think they predicted a lot of the past 40 years in ways that, like, I don't even think Machine Stops or 1984 or Brave New World could possibly have done.
Yeah, but it's because those books are standing on the shoulders of those previous books. Like,
well, yeah, I know.
So I'm saying, like, it's way more impressive that E.M. Forster was sitting in, like, the English countryside in 1909, and he's not even a sci-fi writer. He's just some, like, kind of standard, like, novelist, and he, like, basically predicts what's going to happen in, like, the next 120 years. So I'm just trying to emphasize how kind of incredible the predictions are in the book. I'm not discounting like the quality or anything of like more recent stuff, but I'm just trying to emphasize just how impressive it is. I don't even know what accounts for it. I don't know. I wish there was more about like the background on his writing of the story, but there doesn't seem to be much from what I can find. Because it was just, I think it got published in a magazine, and then it got put later in one of his like short story collections, and then it kind of, I think people talked about it, like it was adapted into this, like they did like a TV episode adaptation on this British sci-fi anthology series from the 60s, which I watched yesterday, and it was pretty good, pretty faithful to the story. But generally, I guess what all I'm really trying to say is everybody's heard of 1984 and Brave New World, and and for that matter, even people who've never read these books have probably heard of like Neuromancer and so on. Or like Asimov or any of these more modern guys, but have no idea about this short story, which in a lot of ways kind of got a lot of this stuff more accurately than even like stuff written in like the 60s when the internet actually was starting to exist. But anyway, I feel like I'm going on too long about this. We should just maybe get into the story, unless you want to add any more sort of preamble to our discussion.
Well, I guess not.
I guess it's probably pretty clear the way that I'm talking about it, but
exactly. I think
I really loved this story, and I did read it like a number of years ago, and I liked it then, but I like it. I like it so much more now. I guess maybe because I'm reading it for the podcast, so I was like doing more like background research and stuff that I didn't do when I read it the first time. So it just it seems all the more well written and impressive to me now. But I guess we should like just talk about what happens in this thing, right?
Yes, I think so.
So it's actually...
But what if I told you nothing happened? That it was just a lot of people sitting and being fed by a machine?
That's stuff. Those are things happening.
The whole time I read this is a bit beside the point, but let's take this as Jason's opener to the book. I like to see this as a side story of WALL-E, where like I know WALL-E and Eva are out on this planet falling in love with the machines, you know. And we're watching a short story. This is like a short aside of the chair people you see in WALL-E in their extreme comfort. Their floating chairs feeding them.
Yeah, there's definitely some connection there for sure. Like just, I guess for some reason I didn't picture these people as quite as repulsive. Because maybe in the sense that like, yes, there are literally moving chairs. You don't have the idea of like taking away human beings like need for physical movement basically is a part of this story. And yeah, there's like a chair that you sit in that just sort of moves you around your little chamber. But I think a key difference would be that these people are like pseudo intellectuals, or maybe whatever real intellectuals. Like
they've been convinced at least that they're intellectuals.
Well,
I feel like they just sit. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, instead of watching TV, which there's nothing really like TV mentioned in this story. They do mention like I forget what the weird antiquated word they use.
Watching like lectures or whatever.
Cinematovote. Those who still wanted to know what the earth was like had after all only to listen to some gramophone, or to look into some cinematovote.
No, what it reminded me of is I'm guilty of this too, but like in our generation, everyone watching like every YouTube channel for information or listening to podcasts for information, and suddenly we're an intellectual, but on a different scale, where like everything they're fed by the machine, they automatically believe. It's like taking all the information without any of the critical thinking.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, so yeah, a big part of the story is that people interact with each other through these voice and sometimes video mechanisms, and they deliver lectures. That's basically how they sort of fill their days, is like people delivering lectures about whatever subject, like history, whatever, music. And it would basically be like a sort of proto version of, I think your example is actually right on, like just like surfing through YouTube, but you could maybe even see it just as like a slightly less mindless, like, you know, scrolling through like your feed or whatever. But just to set up our characters here, there's really only two characters that even have names and that are central to the story, and it's their son and a mother, and the mother's name is Vashti, although I listened to some of the audiobook, and I guess the British pronunciation would be Vashti. Maybe the American pronunciation would be Vashti. It doesn't really matter. We'll probably just call her the mother. And then there's the son, whose name is Kuno, and they are separated by thousands of miles. So from what I could tell, the mother lives in or near Australia, because she mentions like giving a lecture on Australian music, and she's also described as living in the southern hemisphere while the son lives in the northern hemisphere. And it seems pretty clear from like sort of some of the geographical clues or whatever that he's in England, but we'll get to that a little more like through the plot. But yeah, in terms of characters, that's really all you need to know, is the mother and the son. So the story begins with describing this singular room, and I guess I'll quickly read here like this introductory paragraph that describes some of it. Imagine, if you can, a small room, hexagonal in shape, like the cell of a bee. It is lighted neither by window nor by lamp, yet it is filled with a soft radiance. There are no apertures for ventilation, yet the air is fresh. There are no musical instruments, and yet, at the moment that my meditation opens, this room is throbbing with melodious sounds. An armchair is in the center, by its side a reading desk. That is all the furniture. And in the armchair sits a swaddled lump of flesh, a woman about 5 feet high, with a face as white as fungus. It is to her that the little room belongs. And
sorry, that face white as fungus is just,
yeah, the swaddled lump of flesh like leapt out to me immediately. It was like, it actually just reminded me of like sort of modern experimental fiction writers that I read sometimes. Like I was like, wow, it's kind of like a jarring image. But yeah, face as white as fungus. It didn't even hit me until maybe the second time I read it that it's just kind of it's cluing us in on the fact that she never sees real sunlight, so she's just pale as fuck, like a little, I don't know, hairless mole rat. Naked mole rat. But then she gets a call. She gets a Zoom notification basically, and in the form of an electric bell ringing. Oh, there's electricity. So I guess I'm wrong about there not really being electricity in this world. And it's her son. Her son is he's trying to FaceTime with his mom, and she does not give a fuck about talking to her kid, who lives on the other, side of the earth. To me, this like right away illustrated like shortened attention spans of the internet age. She's like immediately like irritable and saying like, so when she answers the FaceTime, she says, very well, let's talk. I will isolate myself. Okay, when they talk about isolating themselves, that basically means they're like muting themselves to all other like incoming calls or, communications. So she says, I'll isolate myself. I do not expect anything important will happen for the next 5 minutes, for I can give you fully 5 minutes, Kuno. So she only has like this little 5-minute interval to give to her kid.
Like talk. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's almost hard to say that he's even her kid. Like, I mean, obviously he is, but like the way that they're forced to raise the children, which it goes into a little later, or what's considered being a parent in this society.
True. Yeah, like it's eventually revealed to us that like this is very, very similar to Brave New World. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Huxley maybe cribbed this from this story, is that children are like taken from birth from the mother and raised in like collective nurseries. But she talks about later, like she references having multiple children and how Kuno is the only one she stayed in touch with, and how she would go visit him even when he was like an infant. Because I guess that was permitted in this weird world. But yeah, you're right. Like they don't really have any sort of connection that we would recognize as like parent to child. Or if they do, it's like a very abusive, weird one. But like, it's sort of revealed gradually that she does like ultimately care about him to varying degrees throughout the story. So yeah, she tells him to hurry up and like get to the point. Like, this is wasting my time. And basically the whole conversation, and we should say the technology that they can like see each other in, since this is a completely pre-screen world. Like the screen is like not even a concept in 1909. He describes them as plates, a blue plate that like people's images just appear on. And Kuno basically says he wants his mother to like take the airship to come visit him in person, and she thinks that's like insane. Like, why would I leave? We're talking right now. And he's basically saying, like he wants some IRL time with his mom because he has something important he wants to tell her, which is basically that he wants to, in so many words, he's basically saying he wants to get out of this like chamber, and like I think he describes it as he wants to like see the stars from the surface of the earth. And she thinks that's just like disgusting. Like she actually,
like, why? Yeah, she does. Like, why would you ever want to see that vast expanse of just oppressive stars? Like, I think she describes them as oppressive at one point.
Yeah, she hates stars. She hates the sky. She hates sunlight. She hates the dirt that's on the ground. And we're sort of shown to believe that like she describes it as all higher forms of life have vanished from the surface, and that it's just like dust and dirt basically, and like a few like shrubs or something. I guess that leads me to one thing that I liked about the book overall, actually, is that the author doesn't like go into like the super deep origins of like what led us to this place in time, even though like history is referenced, so we know that there's a reference point of like things used to be different, but it doesn't explain like step by step how the world became like enveloped by this like great series of machines. And I kind of like that ambiguity, honestly, because it just, I don't know, it lets your imagination like wander a little bit. And also, it's not always necessary to like, I don't know, have to explain everything in a story. Like, the technology is explained, but it's not like the inner workings of the technology are explained either. Like, it just says like, there are these pneumatic tubes that can send things to people, but it doesn't explain like who builds the tubes, like where do they go? How do they work? Like how do the blue plates work? It's just like, okay, this is just what it is. This is what reality is for these people. And that actually is like kind of a big part of this story in my mind too is about how like everyone who relies heavily on technology has no clue how it works, and that is like totally applicable to like the present day. I mean, I've heard people describe this before, like if there was a certain kind of breakdown in like, I don't know, major technological infrastructure or just infrastructure period, wouldn't have to necessarily be like whatever digitally based or something, but there's really only so many people that know how this shit works, and if those people were to somehow not be around, those things would just be gone.
Yeah, it'd be a massive problem.
Yeah. Like everyone's carrying, we're all carrying like little computers around in our pockets, but like maybe what, like 0.0000001% of the people on the planet know how they actually function. I mean, maybe that's just a guess, but so go ahead.
Oh no, I was on that actual function thing. Yeah, something like that. I was going to say maybe no one, but some people know how parts of it function.
Right. See, that's a good point, is that like these technologies are like, yeah, they're made by like teams of people who focus in on like one like specific part of the overall machine, for, you know, to shorthand it. And so it's all very like, it's this idea that we sort of think that like these huge systems of things that we use every day, like not even like, even forgetting about like computers and phones and shit, just thinking about like, I don't know, like the water supply, like even something that seems like it wouldn't be that complicated. I don't know. But my point is, it's like everything is very precarious, even though it doesn't feel like it. We assume like we're on like solid ground, but it would only take like one or two like sort of key catastrophes to like bring the whole fucking thing down. Yeah. It sort of reminds me of how like we were talking like a while back about like the idea of like an unprecedentedly huge like solar flare just like shutting down like the world's electric grid, and how very few people would know how to like sort of get it up and running again. But I digress. And so the phone call ends with the son basically like hanging up angrily, because the mother just is basically like, no, I don't have time to come visit you. Like I have lectures to give and to listen to, and I have the book of the machine to be reading, which I guess I'll just mention now. While there is like literature being read, that was one of the things that was like not mentioned, I'm pretty sure, that I couldn't quite figure out. And I guess it was basically like they said only one physical book was left in the world, and that's the book of the machine, I think they call it, which is basically like the Bible of this society.
The religious text.
And there's a point where the mother is literally, it describes her as like she's alone in this chamber, but she still kind of looks around like slightly embarrassed, and then she kisses the book and is like literally. I didn't think she kissed. I thought she was masturbating to the book. Are you serious?
Yeah, I thought that whole scene was her like, because she was ashamed that she was masturbating. I thought the subtext was she was masturbating
maybe
to the machine / book.
Maybe you're right. I didn't go that far in my mind, but
maybe
I also,
maybe I'm just have a dirty brain, come to think of it, because definitely when I was reading it, I was like, man, this is risque. This is like she's masturbating to the machine because she's having like her humanly urges.
Yeah,
but, like there's no outlets, so like your outlet is this like God figure, the machine.
It is
the thing you also want to sex.
It does. Her devotion does come off as like, at the very least, sort of romantic, if not, I guess, sexual too. Yeah, but she's whether the author meant for us to assume she's cranking one out or not. I guess that's the wrong word. Why am I saying that? Rubbing one out. Whatever. she loves this fucking book. Let's just put it that way. And she relies on it a lot. And yeah, it's seen as, it's raised up as this precious thing within this society. But what I was going to say is I wonder how they're reading anything else, because it's implied that these people are there. No, there's actually a point where it's talking about all the different buttons that they can press in their chamber and all the different things that can be summoned. And one of them was literature. It's like, press the literature button. So I don't know exactly if that, maybe it comes up on the plate, or I don't know, but very minor point. Don't really need to think about it too long there. Oh, and another interesting thing about the communication, this sort of Zoom-like communication with the plates, is in this first conversation with the son, it's described that that the images are feel inaccurate. I've got it marked here. So this is right when the son hangs up on her. It says, he broke off, and she fancied that he looked sad. She could not be sure, for the machine did not transmit nuances of expression. It only gave a general idea of people, an idea that was good enough for all practical purposes, Vashti thought. The imponderable bloom declared by a discredited philosophy to be the actual essence of intercourse was rightly ignored by the machine, just as the imponderable bloom of the grape was ignored by the manufacturers of artificial fruit. Something good enough had long since been accepted by our race. And I thought that was pretty interesting, is like the simulation of reality is just accepted as like good enough. Like we don't need the real, like simulations just get us to where we need to go. It's fine. And I feel like that definitely could apply to today. And I guess with all the talk about like the applications to the present, like it seems like a bunch of like a number of like think pieces or literary like whatever review sites and stuff have brought up this story since coronavirus because of like quarantining and social distancing and stuff, because it obviously applies to that as well, like people living in isolation and doing everything through the internet. It really is
I've always done it.
Right. But now it's a little more on a mass scale. And also the difference is that people are doing it, because, well, no, it's actually very similar to the story, because in the story, people don't go outside because they're afraid they'll instantly die. I mean, so it's not an exact like 1-to-1 comparison, but it's pretty similar. And I think it's no accident that the story is being kind of revived on a small level the last like year and a half or so. Just to further kind of explain what the room is like, and then we'll move on in the plot. So this is describing Vashti's room, which later we find out all the rooms are like perfectly identical as well. Whether you're in Australia or England or whatever, like just they're the same everywhere. It says, then she generated the light, and the sight of her room flooded with Actually, let me read the sentence right before this. It kind of adds something to it, I think. For a moment, Vashti felt lonely. This is right after the kind of failed phone FaceTime with her son. She felt lonely. Then she generated the light, and the sight of her room, flooded with radiance and studded with electric buttons, revived her. There were buttons and switches everywhere, buttons to call for food, for music, for clothing. There was the hot bath button, by pressure of which a basin of imitation marble rose out of the floor, filled to the brim with a warm, deodorized liquid. There was the cold bath button. There was the button that produced literature. And there were, of course, the buttons by which she communicated with her friends. Social media much? The room.
Amazing that she has friends. That was one thing that shocked me in this, is that these people still communicate, because it really does seem like they just spend all their time not isolated. Well, they do, but
Well, physically they are, but that's
Yeah.
the whole like really prescient thing about this story is like it is so accurate to today. Like people think they have thousands of friends because of whatever, Twitter, Facebook, etc. But meanwhile they're sitting in their house pressing other buttons to order food, order clothes. I mean, this is literally the present day. The only difference is people aren't living in underground identical chambers yet.
That's true.
Just the last sentence here. The room, though it contained nothing, was in touch with all that she cared for in the world. And then it describes her turning off the isolation switch, which she had turned on to talk to her son. And it says, all the accumulations of the last 3 minutes burst upon her. The room was filled with the noise of bells and speaking tubes. What was the new food like? Could she recommend it? Has she had any ideas lately? Might one tell her one's own ideas? Would she make an engagement to visit the public nurseries at an earlier date? So it's just, I mean, that again also feels exactly like, you know, say you take a break from the internet and when you get back on, your inbox is full of shit. Like your various feeds are like piled up way higher than they were before. Like it just sounds.
How do you know that about me?
I know it about myself. I'm a human living in the modern world. But I also know it.
Oh, don't lie.
I know it. Yeah, you're right. I'm a time traveler ghost. Oh, and this even more feels like now the sentence right after what I just read. To most of these questions, she replied with irritation, a growing quality in that accelerated age. It's just like this idea of like we have access to all the information, we have access to all the entertainment, yet like none of it is like ultimately good enough. We're still like kind of irritated often, maybe not all the time, and she's not irritated all the time either, but like it's like she kind of vacillates between like irritation and being like totally sedated or like horny for her like her book, her holy book, and for like all of her buttons and, you know, lights and whatever, all the stuff she can do.
Gadgets.
Yeah, the gadgets and whatnot. But like, I think the biggest thing for her is like these lectures and these like ability to like chat with people about like minutia. Like that was another thing that reminded me of the present day. Was one of the questions she got from someone was like, what was the new food like? And it just made me think of like fucking Instagram photos of food, you know, shit like that.
I do love posting those.
Yeah.
Or I did. I've actually kind of stopped using Instagram.
I have to.
Just because of, I think maybe coronavirus did it to me. I mean, I kind of wanted to stop anyways, but then I stopped going out. And then I just stopped caring about pictures.
You didn't have any restaurant food to take pictures of, so you stopped Instagram.
Yeah. I didn't have to keep track of everything I ate. I just used Instagram as my calorie counter. a very public calorie counter.
Posting
a record.
Everything you put into your body.
Man, I kind of wish that I had, every time I had posted a food picture on Instagram, that I'd also included the calorie count, because I think that would be funny. Oh well.
There's another thing that I found really interesting that will come back later in the story is it describes. Well, first of all, it describes her like daily routine, and it just sounds sort of like weirdly miserable, but she's like completely content with it. It's basically like she turns off the lights, she sleeps, she wakes up, she eats, she talks with her friends, she listens to music, she attends lectures, then she does it all over again. And then after that description, it says, above her, beneath her, and around her, the machine hummed eternally. She did not notice the noise, for she had been born with it in her ears. So that obviously tells us she's never experienced life outside of this environment. So she gave birth in that room. I guess was impregnated in that room, presumably. And I guess we find out like she's left occasionally, I guess, to travel on the airship. But generally she's spent like her entire life in this one chamber. But the idea is that like the machine is always making this kind of noise that like they don't even notice because it's, they've just been around it for so long. And since the title of this book is The Machine Stops, you can maybe imagine what might happen if the machine stops. So she eventually decides she is going to go visit her son. So there's this whole description of her, like she has to like in the room. Like that's the other thing we should mention is these people aren't imprisoned. Like these people choose to stay in their chambers because why leave? You have everything you need, right? Like, but you can press a button and like this passageway will open up. And actually like this weird scene where she opens it and is just staring at it, like kind of like terrified. Like she's basically starting to like have a panic attack, just thinking about leaving her chamber. But eventually she like gets the wherewithal to leave, and she gets on this airship, and I guess it's supposed to take like 2 days to fly to what I think is England from Australia. The reason we can kind of deduce that she's going towards England is because of like the names. They just sound like England, like names of places in England. But it describes her flying over like Sumatra and then flying over the Himalayas and then flying over Greece. So it's like all going in that direction towards England. And a couple interesting things happen on the trip. She absolutely hates it. She hates being around other people, like physically, like, and so does everyone else. There's like descriptions of like everyone just like looking really like squeamish and uncomfortable to like be in the same room with other people, or the same, whatever vessel. And, they also like she's like we already mentioned, like she's disgusted by like the outside world. Like she doesn't literally disgusted. Like it upsets her to see the ground and to see the sky and to see stars. And there's some like malfunction with this like metal curtain or whatever that's supposed to go over her window, and she starts freaking out and calls to like the attendant because like some sunlight is like leaking through like this little hole in the curtain.
It had to make you think of the buses in Korea.
It did.
Or is that just me? It's like every time I've taken like a bus trip in Korea to like a different city, everyone closing the blinds because of the weird thing with the sun.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that, but yeah, yeah, it's like it's a little less of an extreme version, but yeah. I guess that's just because people want to sleep, but for her, it's like she's like about to have a panic attack because the sun might touch her, like the sunlight might touch her body. That's what she's like worried about. That's how deranged these people have become about the outside world. And there's also this weird thing with the attendant, and where the attendant is kind of different from everybody else, where like the way she talks and stuff is like, at some point she even says like, oh, like, pardon me for like speaking speaking with the unmechanical language. So like, I guess like in this age of the machine, like the names for places have all been kind of changed to like maybe just a series of numbers or something. But she's pointing out at one point like, oh, the mother is like, what's that down there? And she's like, oh, those are like the Himalayas. Like people of older civilizations used to call that like the rooftop of the world because in their minds, like there was like it reached the sky and there was no way to get around it. And she's just like so disinterested in all this like majestic nature and stuff. Like I feel like almost like in the book, like the more sort of beautiful and grand the descriptions of the things below the airship, the more and more like irritated and like not like unimpressed she is by all of it.
Yeah, like me too.
And at one point she's
like anything big is just like I think it just like living in that type of isolation and always like, you know, a fear of it, a fear of like the vastness of what the world could be.
Yeah. Just even on like a physical level, yeah, you would feel like unsafe or something if you're like not sort of closed in. But it also reminds me of a thing that comes up kind of over and over again is she says the reason she doesn't like these certain things like stars, the earth, the Himalayas, the entire nation of Greece at one point, she just closes the blinds on Greece. She's like, but every time she says this shit and does this stuff, she says, it gives me no ideas. Like, rather than, like, I've been just describing it as disgust, and it is kind of disgust, but her, like, rationalization, her reason is, it gives me no ideas. And the way that they talk about ideas in this story is really weird. Like, this is not my idea. I read this somewhere else, but they describe this whole thing as like, it's almost like ideas are like almost like a cryptocurrency in this society. And that's why people are constantly like giving and listening to like lectures and stuff. It's just like you gather ideas, but you don't create ideas. Like, it's just like, they're like things to like collect. Because I mean, there's a part a little later on where like this one lecturing character basically says he condemns the idea of first-hand ideas, aka like original thoughts, and says that we should be content with and only want like second-hand ideas, third-hand ideas. Like, why would I want the direct experience of like, I don't know, climbing a mountain or looking at this mountain range when I can just listen to someone lecture to me about a book they read written by a person whose friend climbed a mountain. It's like so many steps removed from the direct experience is like all the better is the way that this society starts thinking about things. And so yeah, it's like a motif throughout the story, though, is this thing of, it gives me no ideas, so it's worthless. Like, what function does it have for me, you know? In other words, like the idea of like sort of beauty for its own sake, or like, you know, enjoyable experience for its own sake is like kind of just, it's just like vanished basically. So yeah, we also like on the airship journey, we also get a little bit more about the way that reproduction is handled in this society. There's like,
which was,
go ahead.
Oh no, there's the reproduction stuff. Like, basically they just carry the child to term, right? And then like I felt like they didn't have the child more than for a few weeks after it was born, or maybe I misread. Like, just long enough to teach the child how to press the buttons, and then the ideal is to move the child across the world as far away from the parent as possible to like sever connections, to make sure that like humanity never develops really close ties to each other. Right.
Well, and they still allow them to like communicate through like the plates or whatever.
The machine, yeah.
But again, that kind of goes to the whole point of how it's like a facsimile of real, you know, interaction or whatever. Yeah, I don't remember the details of like how long they keep the child. I think it's very short, whatever it is. But on the ship, there are these like young men riding on the ship, and the attendant explains that what was it, that they were off on some other place, basically like impregnating people. And they were coming back. They were going somewhere to take the place of people that had died. Like to take over their chambers. And there's this whole idea of the birth rate and the death rate have to be basically like the same in this machine society, which also gets brought up. There's also like euthanasia. So you could like apply for the machine to kill you when you feel like dying. And there's a weird part where the mother is like, she's upset because one of her lectures didn't go well. So she applies for euthanasia, but is denied it. And like, she's telling like one of her friends this over like FaceTime or whatever. And that's where they explain the idea of like the death rate must not like outweigh the birth rate or something like that. So I thought that was weird.
It was weird.
Yeah, here it is. I'll just read it really quick. The passengers sat each in his cabin, avoiding one another with an almost physical repulsion and longing to be once more under the surface of the earth. There were 8 or 10 of them, mostly young males, sent out from the public nurseries to inhabit the rooms of those who had died in various parts of the earth. The man who had dropped his book, meaning the book of the machine, was on the homeward journey. He had been sent to Sumatra for the purpose of propagating the race. So that's what it was. Okay. And yeah, so I'm just seeing the no ideas here, murmured Vashti, and hid the mountains behind a metal blind. In the evening, she looked again. They were crossing a golden sea in which lay many small islands and one peninsula. She repeated, no ideas here, and hid Greece behind a metal blind. I didn't come up with this on my own. I'm taking this from another, like a review that I read, but they pointed out that was like a kind of a funny little bit of like sort of satirical humor. The idea that Greece, like kind of the birthplace of philosophy, has no ideas there. She's just like, fuck this Greece place. Shut the window. Kind of funny.
It's funny. That whole scene on the airship was kind of just like funny to me.
Yeah, it has a lot of, there's a lot of like methods of satire used throughout this story, but I also felt like maybe the most kind of outright funny parts were on that journey as well. Another part of it was that so when the mother was like freaking out about the sunlight trying to touch her, she like kind of fell out of her chair, and the attendant like put her hand out to like steady her and make sure she didn't fall on the ground. And like the whole airship of people like gasped and were like disgusted that a person could touch another person. Because that's like the ultimate like faux pas in this society. Like people aren't supposed to touch each other, basically. It's just not done. It's unseemly. That I guess makes you have to use your imagination and wonder how they're breeding. But I guess it could be through impersonal scientific means. But so then the mother arrives to the son's chamber across the world, and this is the first thing that she says to her son. She doesn't say hello. She doesn't, this is the very first thing she says after she's traveled across the world to see him. Here I am. I've had the most terrible journey and greatly retarded the development of my soul. It is not worth it, Kuno. It is not worth it. My time is too precious. The sunlight almost touched me, and I have met with the rudest people. There, I assume she's talking about the attendant who tried to help her not fall on the ground. I can only stop a few minutes. Say what you want to say, and then I must return. So she's just arrived, and she's talking about turning around and leaving like a minute later. I mean, that's kind of hilarious. So she arrives, and then right after she says that, her son tells her, I've been threatened with capital H, homelessness, said Kuno. She looked at him now. And then the author goes on to explain to us that homelessness means death. It's when the victim is exposed to the air, which kills him. But then he goes on to, through him telling the story, we find out what Kuno's been doing, which is he figured out a way to get outside onto the surface of the earth. So also when he tells her that he's been outside, she thinks it's terrible, but she also doesn't understand why he should be killed for it, because she mentions that it's perfectly legal to go outside as long as you get a respirator and what's called an egression permit. She says, it's not the kind of thing that spiritually minded people do, and I begged you not to do it, but there's no legal objection to it. And he goes on to say he didn't actually get that permit, and what he actually did do was he found he went out into like the kind of little hallway that leads from his chamber to whatever the other chambers, other places. There's like a sort of transportation system, it seems like a train of some sort, because they mention like a third rail or something later on. Well, first what he starts doing is he starts like just pacing back and forth, and like basically he's getting like physical exercise, which is kind of like frowned upon. Anyway, the way he gets outside is he's just kind of like feeling the wall, and like he finds kind of like a weak spot or a damaged spot, and he basically like punches his way through it, and he climbs into this like air shaft, and he sees what looks like a hatch like in the ceiling, but it's like pretty dark in there, so he's not exactly sure. So he has to kind of take like a literal leap of faith towards it, which he does, and he grabs onto it, and like the force of his jump like kind of spins it till the hatch opens, and this like immense air pressure like blasts him out into the outer world for presumably the first time ever in his life. And it describes him as like having to quote sip air from this opening, because his respirator like flew off during this like burst, and the respirator is just kind of like hovering in midair because there's like this flow of air still going. But this is, I should say, there's this artificial air that's pumped into these chambers, and then, what the authority figures have told everyone is poisoned air outside. And I feel like it's almost left like kind of vague whether or not it really is unbreathable, or whether or not that's just what.
Yeah, I felt that way too.
I mean, I think there's a point when he's out there though where he like walks away from the sort of like artificial airstream, or no, the artificial airstream just like stops, and then he's like actually having a hard time breathing. But I also thought maybe that could just be like all psychological, because he's been told his whole life that it's poison. Well, actually, no. What am I saying? It's actually kind of obvious later that humans can survive on the surface, because we find out that he does. It's really not made super clear in the story, but it's made really clear in the TV version. So that's the only way I realized it. But he sees a woman who like kind of runs towards him when he starts screaming for help, and it's because this thing called the mending apparatus, which he describes as like a bunch of white worms approaching him and basically like dragging him back into the underground. Basically that starts to happen. And then I think he describes to his mother, like he kind of like passes out or something and just wakes up in his chamber again. And
that's kind of how I read it too.
And during this whole like recounting of the story, they're having these kind of interesting back and forths about like he basically accuses the mother of like religiously worshiping the machine, and she's like offended. She's like basically saying like, oh, here, I found it right here. You're beginning to worship the machine, he said coldly. You think it irreligious of me to have found a way out of on my own. It was just what the committee thought when they threatened me with homelessness. So I guess we should also mention there are these two committees referenced, which at first I thought were just like actual machinery, but I realized that they're people. They're just people that are in a position of power. But anyway, so there's like the central committee, and then there's also this thing called like the committee of the mending apparatus, and they kind of come into play at certain points. But anyway, so at this accusation, at this she grew angry. I worship nothing, she cried. I am most advanced. I don't think you irreligious, for there is no such thing as religion left. All the fear and the superstition that existed once have been destroyed by the machine. Kind of circle back. The idea of how it's seen as like it's not really outlawed necessarily, but it's just seen as like something you don't do, which is like exercise and become muscular. We get to this sort of this dark eugenics element where well, here, I'll just read it. By these days it was a demerit to be muscular. Each infant was examined at birth, and all who promised undue strength were destroyed. Humanitarians may protest, but it would have been no true kindness to let an athlete live. He would never have been happy in that state of life to which the machine had called him. He would have yearned for trees to climb, rivers to bathe in, meadows and hills against which he might measure his body. So it's almost being described as like a mercy killing, because it's like, oh, you've got the makings of an athlete. You don't want to live in this Wall-E chair world or whatever.
Yeah. You got the makings of not just an athlete, but someone who wants to explore, who wants to do more. Right,
exactly.
Yada, yada.
Which is like, so maybe they fucked up when they let Kuno live, because he's definitely, I mean, if his isn't obvious from all the things we've explained so far, like Kuno is obviously the rebellious one here. He wants to like be free of this machinery. He wants to like live out in the fields and, you know, look at the stars and all of that stuff. He's the romantic, I guess. He has kind of an interesting thing about that too, where he's talking about how he just like, he discovered the sense of things like near and far. 'Cause like when you're just in that chamber, like you really lose that sort of physical sense. And he talks about like how he realized his hands are like what does he say? Man's feet are the measure for distance. His hands are the measure for ownership. His body is the measure for all that is lovable and desirable and strong. So this is like what he's discovered through his like his secret exercising and his escaping to the surface, however like brief that was.
Some parts of this, I actually think this is a really cool story. But some parts of it also makes me think of like Ayn Rand's book Anthem, which is about a person breaking free of a collective society and realizing that they have their own ego.
Yeah, I see why you'd make that connection. But that's what's so interesting about this story, because I feel like it sort of eludes like simple explanation. Because I at first I was reading it as like, oh, maybe this is like a yeah, like almost like an Ayn Randian like protest against like communism. But like communism wasn't even really a thing yet at this point. But I think if anything, he's maybe reading a little bit more into. I couldn't really find much about his like exact politics, other than he was a humanist. He was like literally part of like some British like humanist society, which basically is, you know, it's just a way of saying like you're not religious and you believe in like liberal democracy and stuff. I guess he wrote an essay just called like What I Believe, and it was basically like he's against fascism and totalitarianism and for democracy, and like basically that's it. Like one thing I thought about, like, I don't know, the sort of like overall point of view of the story, I guess, is like, I feel like it could be sort of like a Rorschach test. Like you could maybe insert like, this is an anti-communist story, but I think you could just as easily insert like, this is an anti-capitalism story, because capitalism is often like described as like functioning like a machine. Although like the economy in this story is basically like, well, it seems to just be the exchange of second, third, fourth, whatever hand ideas. But so yeah, I don't think it has a super clear political point of view, other than like the simple like individualism is good, but also so is like a sense of community, because that's the thing too, is people are totally isolated, and like that's the exact opposite of communism. Like people being in like their isolated little cells having everything they want, like that's not the vision of like socialism or communism either. So
but they're in their little cells They have everything they want, and everything's done for them, and they all share in the collective goods of the machine.
Yeah, but I mean, doesn't that strike you as like, I mean, like we've been saying, like,
Not capitalism.
well,
It strikes me as a dystopia.
well, yeah, but what kind? I mean, I'm saying that like usually the idea of like collectivism would be like all of these individuals coming together to produce something. These individuals aren't coming together to do shit. They're just sitting there passively with their tubes and their buttons, and like there's nothing really about like money and profit, but it seems almost like this would be like the sort of future dystopic end result of a capitalistic society in a way. It's like as long as goods and services are still being like bought and sold, but then again, I'm not saying 100% that that's like the accurate reading. I think you could slap like a lot of different ideologies onto this story and it would make some sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, it also doesn't have to be super political, the book. It is really just about he's watching. I know that part of his inspiration was is that he's watching the Industrial Revolution going on around him and machines making everything easier. So it could also just be read as like a Luddite account of like why we shouldn't trust technology or let technology take our jobs, because eventually we'll just become completely dependent on it and lose our sense of self to our machines.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel like if we have to like I mean, I wrote down in what I like a list of things that you could insert as the sort of the villain, the culprit. Like, what does the machine represent? And it could just be like authoritarianism itself. It could be capitalism. It could be communism. It could be just the industrial revolution itself. Although that's like the most like obvious interpretation, I think, but it could also be like the sort of like the hubris of humankind, like, and just sort of like,
I was going to say maybe humans are the villain.
well, I mean, that's the thing is like the whole point. Yeah, the big part of the story is like people made this machine, but now the machine is there's something almost literally said. I don't know exactly where, but about people controlled the machine. Now the machine controls people. I mean, I guess that's kind of obvious. That's what's going on here. But even though there are these committees and stuff, like they have just as little control over what the machine is doing at this point than as anybody.
Yeah, I mean, so like one thing that I always have a problem with this type of thing is like I think some of like the complaint in this story is that humankind has eradicated work because they've invented a machine that does everything for them. I dislike that because I almost dream of a society where we eradicate shit jobs and jobs that no one wants to do just so people can focus on work they actually want to do, like drawing pictures, which you don't really get in this story or other stories I've read like this, which I think this story is really cool and points out something that, you know, it's bad to become dependent on your tools, I guess. But also, I sometimes take stories like this or try to tell you that, no, the only real way to do stuff is just to continue working, to continue suffering. That without that, we can't be human anymore.
Yeah, that's one interpretation. I don't know that it's even, I don't think it's necessarily a call to like smash all the machines either. I think it's like maybe a sort of it's a distant warning, you know? I mean, the other thing is this is a short story. I feel like if he had been more sort of passionate about this specific issue, like the issue of the Industrial Revolution, like having its downsides, he would have maybe written like a full novel. I mean, whatever the author's intentions, I think you could still read it as like it's an imaginative like daydream of where like the possibilities of like the sort of deep future. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that Forster is would be the type of person to say like we should what makes us human is like being exploited and like working our fingers to the bone. Although the little bit I've learned about him, the way that he managed to be a writer, and even though he wrote these incredibly famous books, and I think he was nominated for Nobel Prize like 16 times or something.
Jesus, that's crazy.
But the way
Didn't
he was
know that.
able to focus his life on writing novels and stuff was he just got like a big inheritance from like a dead aunt or something like that. I can't remember exactly who, but so he,
Okay. Well, that's how a lot of writers get started.
yeah. But I don't know. I think he like I said, he was a humanist, so I think he did have like he was an idealist about like a sort of like democratic utopia that could exist one day. But that's just my inference from like, you know, some Wikipedia-ing around and from reading the story and reading a couple articles and stuff. So, but
Yeah.
let's kind of just get through the rest of this, because I know you got to go pretty soon.
Yeah, I need to hurry.
Let's just sum up the last section of the book here.
Okay, so like the last section is the machine is starting to fail or stop. And isn't this where the mom gets to visit the son one more time? And he tells her that the machine is stopping, but there's like signs of it because like the recordings of orchestras are like, I guess, buffering. They don't say buffering in the story, but that's how I took
they're
it.
like glitching out. Well, he gives he says the titular line of the story over the communication device, whatever, the plate, which really weirds her out. But she also, when he says the machine stops, she laughs hysterically because it like does like the sentence doesn't make sense to her because she's so invested
in the
and
machine.
has
Machine
been
is
surrounded by
God.
it. Would be like saying like, I don't know, like the earth will turn off tomorrow. Like it'll stop spinning like in 5 minutes. Like it's just like this nonsensical statement to her. And but just there's two major developments that happen. The first is that the machine or the committee, whatever, they abolish respirators. So that means now it's completely outlawed to go outside. Or, I mean, if you do, you're likely to die. And the second is they reestablish religion, by which it means people become like unabashedly religiously obsessed with, the machine itself.
Machine.
And but then like you said, like there's a sort of gradual breakdown of the machine. So like the artificial fruit begins to be like moldy, the air is like more stale, the lights start to like flicker or become dimmer. And one of the first signs too is that the music that they listen to is like, it's like turning into like sounds that sound like people like screaming in pain and weird shit like that. And
Yeah, buffering.
yeah, buffering.
My buffering always sounds like people screaming in pain. Doesn't
No,
yours?
man, you got a different software than me.
It is my special Suffering OS. Suffering OS. SOS. The OS for people who
But
need help.
the turning point, the big turning point, kind of the final straw, is when the beds, because the way that the beds work in these chambers is you press a button and a bed rises up out of the floor. They all like the entire world's beds stop working, so people like basically can't get any sleep, and so the like complaint department or whatever, the central committee, is like overwhelmed with complaints. And there's this really funny part. I guess I don't have time to really go into it in detail, but it basically reminded me of like the insanity of like customer service when you like call customer service. There's this it's a really kind of funny part where it's just the mother and like one of her friends like making these complaints and then like complaints about complaints, and I don't know. It's very funny and very true to the present day. Again, like something weirdly sort of predicted. But basically, yeah, people become like religiously devoted to the machine, and so even when like basically like everything's breaking down, and now it's to the point where like the chamber's completely dark. There's not even any light. That's when there's this like kind of big dramatic ending that I thought was really, really well written and really kind of like I don't know, moving to me. And it's the son and mother reunite, and it's because we find out that the son had been transferred from England to Australia, and he's living in the same like hallway or whatever as his mother, but they didn't like realize it until basically, well, people are just starting to suffocate because the artificial air has turned off, and the story ends with the mother and the son like talking to each other, and the mother sort of being like, "You were right all along, like this shit is all fucked up," and like they, you know, they kind of have like this embrace, which is like symbolically important because it's like, you know, physical contact with another person. And right as they're like about to die, one of the airships just like crashes into the underground complex, and like the last thing they see, well, I really like the description. I'll read it really quick. An airship had sailed in through the vomitory, a word I had never heard before. I had to look it up. It just means like an entrance or an exit from like a stadium, some kind of opening, basically. The airship had sailed in through the vomitory into a ruined wharf. It crashed downwards, exploding as it went, rending gallery after gallery with its wings of steel. For a moment, they saw the nations of the dead, and before they joined them, scraps of the untainted sky. So they finally got to look at that sky. Yeah, I really love this story. Like I
thought it was super cool. I mean, even with this.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was going to say, even with my things where I was talking about, is this like a cry against collectivism? I think that's just part of it. And I think there's like good and bad versions of collectivism, and I would call this a bad version of collectivism, where like humanity is like collectively decided to put all their faith in the one thing, being the machine in this case.
But I feel like it's also criticizing like extreme individualism too, in a way, because like people are like, yes, they're all kind of doing the same things, but they're doing them in this socially isolated way, which is why this story is just so ahead of its time. And not just because it like predicted like Zoom, like I think just even in its like examination of, yeah, things like collectivism and individualism, I think it's more like nuanced and subtle than a lot of like your typical sort of dystopian stories like in the modern day. I mean, there are tons of great ones, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's one of my favorite genres, really, is the dystopian genre, but there's also a ton of crap out there too, as I'm sure you know. So that's the book, or the story, the novella, whatever. My recommendation this week is just going to be this, the book we read.
Okay, I'll recommend Dune. I watched it last night in theaters. And I thought it was really
just
cool.
Came out today. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I thought it was excellent. I could see some people not liking it because it's a bit slow. It reminded me of like, so I would say it's closer to like a space odyssey than Star Wars.
I dig that.
Which I like, but also it's really loud. It's a really jarring like noise, like soundtrack, which I like, but also it's really loud. Prepare yourself. It might be the loudest movie I've ever seen.
This
reminds
me of when people hyped me up to go see Mogwai play live.
The loudest band ever. I actually really liked seeing Mogwai live, but I never really understood them being the loudest band ever. But I also heard that about My Bloody Valentine, who have not seen live.
I did see,
and I guess they're loud. You get to see them in Seoul. I wanted to. I was too busy with some like work shit.
if I talk about my experience with My Bloody Valentine, you're gonna be late for your appointment. So I guess we should just wrap it up
I gotta
here.
Go to work. Visit us at heatdeathpod.com. Go to our Patreon and support our show if you want us to keep making this content. We'll probably just keep making it anyways.
Or if you don't, please. If someone pays us $100,000, we'll stop making the show.
That should be a tier, I guess.
Put that on there. All right, folks, it's been real.
Pay us this much and we'll quit.
Till next time. See you later.
The first voice recording was made in 1860. It was a 10-second fragment of the French folk song Au clair de la lune recorded by inventor Edward Leon Scott de Martinville. But who will make the final voice recording and when? What will it be? Who will hear it?